I am happier than ever to be sitting right here with you, sitting right here with Nicole, and not sitting in some TV studio somewhere hating my life because journalism isn't what I signed up for. This segment is brought to you by Eastside Weight Loss Clinic. I'm down 37 pounds on the program, and I lost most of that in just 2 months. Do what I did and what so many other undivided viewers have done. Schedule your free 15-minute consultation today at eastsideweightlossclinic.com. I get it that the media bias has been pretty obvious for a long time. I think I woke up to that around the time I quit my job in TV to do this show with all of you. It took me, I think I was a little late to catch on to the fact that the media was just dripping with bias against conservatives. But look, I'm happy to be here. Gosh, I'm so glad I jumped off that ship while it was sinking in time to survive it. But I guess I never thought it would be this bad. Truly, I never thought it could get this bad. And there have been some examples, both locally and nationally, in the last couple weeks that are so black and white, that are so obvious and apparent. I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's liberal, and I just was asking, do you see it? I guess, do you see that the media as a whole, as an ecosystem, is incredibly biased in favor of Democrats? And I was just like, please tell me yes. And they actually said, well, yeah, I think that's pretty obvious. And so it was just like this recognition that, okay, other people see it too. And the question is, do they care, right? And before I dive into this, because I want to spend the first block of the show today detailing some of what we've seen in recent weeks, I want to be clear that I'm leaving out of this conversation outlets that are biased intentionally. MSNBC, I don't think MSNBC pretends to be neutral. The host might think they're being fair or whatever it is, but that's clearly MSNBC is designed for people on the left. It's the same way that Fox News is designed for people on the right. What I'm talking about here are the legacy media outlets, TV, print, radio, that hold themselves up as some sort of beacon of the First Amendment and the Fourth Estate and unbiased news. I'm talking about the CNNs, the NBCs, the CBSs, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and here locally, the TV stations, the Seattle Times. So, I've always said, I say it over and over, I'm not a journalist. 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 Because invariably when I report on something on social media, I'll have trolls who say, oh, real great journalism, Brandi. And I say all the time, I'm not a journalist. I'm a political commentator. I do my opinion. But I will say, not to toot my own horn, toot, but I feel like on this show, what we do more closely resembles the intent of a free press, the intent of the Fourth Estate, than most actual journalism outlets. To me, the fundamental job and the fundamental reason we have the First Amendment and a free press where the government can't tell us what to do or shut us down if we're not reporting on things they like we're China or North Korea, the fundamental reason why it's so important is because you hold powerful people accountable. You're a check on the people in power. You're a check on the government for the people. And if you're not doing that, then what are you doing? And I'm not saying that the media can't include other things like the occasional fun story and, news on where you can get the best hamburger or whatever it is. Fine. All of that has its place, celeb news, whatever it is. But the reason the free press exists is to hold the government accountable and to hold powerful people accountable. And I think there's a lot of reasons why that is just not happening. One is just the demise of old media, which I like the free press is very wise. They've started calling it kind of old media and new media, us being new media, them being old media. And I kind of like that versus, legacy or establishment media or whatever it is. They're dwindling, their ratings suck, their subscriptions suck. There's a reason for that. I think a lot of people see the bias in it. So they don't have the bodies, they don't have the number of journalists to be able to do the work that they used to do. So that's part of it. But the other thing is just an absolute built-in bias into these newsrooms where if they're in a state like Washington where Democrats are in power, well, most of them are tried and true bleeding blue liberals. And they don't have the desire, the pull to hold people of their own political persuasion accountable in the way that they do, Republicans. And in our state, there's not a lot of Republicans making any decisions of consequence. So then they just, focus on other stories, other things, or Orange Man Bad, Donald Trump. Like, God, what are they going to do when Donald Trump isn't around anymore? I mean, that man could die and they would be talking about him and blaming him for things 30 years from now. It's just crazy. I don't know how to get this through to people to expect. You have to expect more of the free press, because if they're not holding the powerful accountable, then we might as well, frankly, get rid of the First Amendment. We might as well have state-run media, because that's kind of in essence what it is already. I promise you, you don't want to see what the United States looks like if we don't have a robust fourth estate holding powerful people accountable anymore, and we are damn dangerously close. So I want to go through some examples of things that, to me, are so black and white that no one can deny it. Absolutely undeniable that our media ecosystem is corrupted, is fundamentally broken, and is so biased toward one side of the aisle that I don't know that it can be repaired. I don't know that it can be fixed. So I'll just start locally with a frustration of mine. We have this story we've been, really going hard on ever since Friday, when we found out that the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, knew that there was a lawsuit challenging all these initiatives that 1.2 million voters signed on to, and they just thought it would be fine to sort of stay quiet about it. And it's one thing, again, I'm in favor of the initiatives. I have a bias. I'm a political commentator. So it's one thing for me to rail about those things. But as I argued on the show yesterday, there were numerous reasons that a free press should have reported on this issue. One of them being that Bob Ferguson doesn't support the initiatives, and that the lawsuit was funded by one of his biggest campaign donors. So, if you're a journalist looking at that, you have to be able to see that and say, wait a second, why is our Attorney General defending the state and the people against a lawsuit brought by one of his biggest campaign donors that is seeking to undermine initiatives that he's on the record saying he doesn't support? So that, more than anything, is a very cut and dry corruption level issue, a clear question of abuse of power that any real journalist should be willing to look at and is important enough for them to cover. But since Friday, what do you think are the only outlets that have covered this story? Opinion outlets that are conservative, and then print outlets that, frankly, lean a little bit conservative or are more sympathetic to conservative causes. Nicole went and she dug the depths of the internet, seeing if we missed something. KTTH, conservative radio station. KVI, conservative radio station. The Center Square, Linwood Times, I don't think that they're blatantly conservative, but they are certainly outlets that are more willing to hold the party in power accountable. And we've seen that. So we're talking about, really, it's only 4 other outlets, because My Northwest is KTTH, essentially. They're the same company in the same building. So none of the mainstream outlets saw fit. I saw the Washington State Standard did a story, but it was kind of on a different lawsuit against the initiatives, and it just mentioned all of these dealings as kind of a footnote, frankly, in the story. So you have this, really, there's so many angles that you could attack this on. If you don't choose to go with the angle that I've chosen to go with as a political commentator, and that is that I feel like AG Bob Ferguson left voters in the dark intentionally, that's my opinion. There are so many other angles on that story that aren't opinion, that are just fact, like I talked about, like Nick Hanauer, a progressive billionaire, funding Defend Washington, which is the entity that brought the lawsuit against the Secretary of State, and somehow AG Bob Ferguson thinks it's appropriate for his office to handle that. That is a clear conflict of interest. Can one freaking news station, one, Seattle Times, King, Como, Cairo, Fox 13, can anyone, hell, I'll take the Tacoma News Tribune, I don't care. Can anyone ask a question of A.G. Ferguson's office about why they would involve themselves in such a clear conflict of interest? That's not asking a lot. It wouldn't be biased for them to do that. It would be the very fundamental, like bottom shelf duty of their job. Are they so overwhelmed with other stories? What's been going on? It's insane to me. And then you look nationally. I've never seen a better illustration of media bias than CBS News and how they covered two identical proposals, one from Donald Trump, the other from Kamala Harris, 1 month apart. Honest to God, this is how CBS News covered these. Donald Trump was the first one to say, we don't want to tax tips. And then a month later, Kamala Harris is like, hey, I don't want to tax tips. Just ripped it off from Donald Trump. That's fine. It's okay to have two candidates of two different parties say they want to do the same thing, but here's how CBS News covered it. Never seen a better example. For Trump a month ago, former President Donald Trump's vow to stop taxing tips would cost the federal government up to $250 billion over 10 years. And then when Kamala Harris came out, Vice President Kamala Harris is rolling out a new policy position saying she'll fight to end taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers. Are you kidding me? Not a better example if you don't see the bias there genuinely. Like, you can't be helped. You are so ideologically driven that you're choosing not to see it. And frankly, the way they covered Donald Trump is better. That's preferable to me. Where you have a presidential candidate who rolls out a policy proposal and you're looking at, okay, what are the impacts of this policy proposal? Hey, this watchdog group says it'll cost us $250 billion over 10 years. That's journalism. I'm fine with that. What I'm not fine with is when Kamala Harris steals it, rolls out the same policy a month later. It's like a campaign story. Rolling out a new policy position to help service and hospitality workers. That's not journalism. And there are so many elements to this story that if the media was doing its job, it would point out. One of them being, and Nicole, can you go to the Biden 2023 tax plan? So not only is this like it's kind of hilarious because Kamala's just copying Donald Trump a month later. The Biden administration with VP Kamala Harris in 2023, they rolled out a program with the intent of cracking down via the IRS on waiters' tips. They literally rolled out a program called the Service Industry Tip Compliance Agreement with the goal of improving tip reporting compliance. So now, a year after that, Kamala Harris is saying, I don't want to tax tips. And then Karine Jean-Pierre was asked, well, what about Biden? Because, he did the whole IRS thing a year ago. Does he support Kamala Harris's new position on not taxing tips? Here's what she said.
Absolutely. Look, this is something that the president supports. He supports eliminating taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers.
That's new? Like, that's brand new. All of a sudden, it'll help Kamala Harris because Trump said it and it was really popular. And oh my God, we can't let him win the working class and waiters and waitresses and service workers. So it's like, oh, forget what we did in 2023 with trying to like make sure that we had better tracking of tips by using the point in time systems or whatever they're called. What are those called? Why can't I think of the name of that? It's the, now it's going to bother me. The system. What do you call the little system?
The system.
Like where you pay with a card.
Like a credit?
Doesn't matter. POS? Point of sale. A point of sale system.
There you go.
I don't know why that bothered me so much. Whew. So they're just totally making it up. It's just ridiculous. In the media, there was a couple outlets that called Kamala Harris out on just all of a sudden adopting Trump's idea from a month ago. But that CBS, I cannot think of a better example. And it's like, oh my God, you're supposed to be a free press acting independently of the government. You're supposed to hold people in power accountable. What are you doing? What a waste. Is that what you joined? Is that what you got into the journalism field to do? I think, unfortunately, a lot of people in journalism, as I saw on TV, they think they're really attractive and pretty and they want to be on TV. Frankly, if I'm being honest, That's what a lot of it is on TV, is people who want to be on TV for the sake of being on TV, and they could not care any less about being actual journalists. So that's a fundamental issue as well. So then moving on, just again, some more examples that are just absolutely insane. The front page of the Time magazine with Kamala Harris on it. I mean, you've seen all the Time magazine front pages where it's been Donald Trump. It's like, oh, they did a picture of his face melting, saying he was having a meltdown. I'm skipping ahead, Nicole, sorry. So they do this like, oh, picture of Kamala Harris, like looking up, surrounded by this illustration of her supporters all around her. And the font says, her moment. Isn't that nice? So they do this, Time magazine feature on her moment. Isn't that great? And then they note in there that she wouldn't even talk to them for the story. And they also note that she has yet to do a substantive interview to explain her policy positions. Yet despite that, they're still doing this. Oh, look at her. Her moment. Isn't this wonderful? She could be the first female president. There's just this groundswell of support for her. People are so enthusiastic. She won't even talk to them for the story. This is mental. It's mental. That's not journalism. It's fangirling. And I feel the same way. But, the issue with conservative media is that there are not a lot of outlets that pretend to be neutral outlets that are like super right-leaning. Like there are elements of like the Fox newsroom, for instance, like Bret Baier. I think Bret Baier is pretty fair. I think he does a pretty good job. But by and large, you have hosts on Fox News that don't hide the fact that they have a conservative bias. But you do have outlets that are not supposed to be biased that lean left. I cannot really think of an example of an outlet that pretends to be, that puts itself forth as a neutral purveyor of news that actually has a hard right bias. So it happens far more with a left-leaning bias. So then there was this live X thing, space on X, with former President Donald Trump and Elon Musk, where Elon Musk came out and he said, hey, I'm going to host, Trump came back to X after Twitter had like banned his account, and then they unbanned him, and he said, well, I'm not going to come back anyway. Well, he decided to come back. Now he's tweeting on X. So Elon Musk said, we're going to host this live space where I'm going to have a conversation. That's what Elon said. He said before, this is not an interview. I'm not interviewing the former president. We're going to have a conversation about issues, and like more than 1 million live concurrents at one point. It had a rocky start. Apparently there was like a DDoS attack, is what they said. But it got going, and it was just what you would expect. It was a conversation between Donald Trump and Elon Musk. It was not a news interview. Yet before it happened, oh my God, the meltdown from the media, that Elon Musk would use his platform to have a conversation with the former president of the United States. There's this clip on CNN where they were saying, well, almost like, well, Elon's not a journalist, so like, how can he do this? Nobody but a journalist can sit down with the former president. Here's the clip.
Well, for one, I think it's going to be a very lighthearted conversation. Because Elon Musk has come out and endorsed Donald Trump, I expect this to be like a bromance type of an interview where they're supporting each other. I think that Elon Musk will let Donald Trump speak all of the falsehoods and misinformation that he wants. I mean, he's not a journalist. It's not his job necessarily. Does he want to be fact-checking all of the information? So I think it's just a platform for Donald Trump to come out and say whatever he wants. But the thing to remember, Cassie, is like the interview audience here is what Donald Trump needs. You see J.D. Vance going on Face the Nation, right? Sunday shows, traditional media, because he needs to get his name out there. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump's going the opposite route, right? He's talking to streamers and podcasters. He's going on X. He wants to rally up that sort of fringe online base. That's what Donald Trump is doing here tonight.
Well, he's meanwhile threatening to sue establishment media like the New York Times, etc.
Yeah, and she says, oh, Elon Musk, he's not a journalist. He's not going to be fact-checking this. You guys don't even fact-check things. Well, you fact-check Donald Trump, but you won't fact-check Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So you're acting like you're the arbitrator of facts when you don't fact-check one entire side of the political aisle, almost ever. And then this one was actually terrifying. It was a Washington Post reporter who was in the briefing room, and honest to God, this is before the thing with Elon and Trump, sounded like he wanted to know whether the White House would or could somehow stop this conversation between Trump and Elon Musk from happening at all.
Elon Musk is slated to interview Donald Trump tonight on X. I don't know if the president is going to tune in. Feel free to say if he is or not. But I think that misinformation on Twitter is not just a campaign issue. It's a America issue. What role does the White House or the president have in sort of stopping that, or stopping the spread of that, or sort of intervening in that? Some of that was about campaign misinformation, but it's a wider thing, right?
Yeah, no, and you've heard us talk about this many times from here, about the responsibilities that social media platforms have when it comes to misinformation, disinformation. Don't have anything to read out from here about specific ways that we're working on it, but we believe that they have the responsibility. These are private companies, so we're also mindful of that too. But look, it is. I think it is incredibly important to call that out as you're doing. I just don't have any specifics on what we have been doing internally as it relates to the interviews. Not something that I'm tracking, and I'm sure the president's not tracking it either.
Yeah, as usual, Karine Jean-Pierre's answer means absolutely nothing. What's problematic there is that somebody who is in a position so powerful that they can be in the briefing room and be able to ask questions to the spokesperson of the president of the United States wants to use their power and their influence to essentially suggest that the White House should somehow be shutting down or limiting the spread of a conversation. I mean, that's anti-First Amendment. You have journalists sitting in the White House briefing room who are anti-First Amendment when it comes to views and people they don't agree with. That's so indicative of the sad state of the Fourth Estate. That's terrifying stuff. I mean, that's China stuff. Again, that's North Korea stuff. That's not supposed to be the United States of America. And when you have the media that is so far gone like that, it hurts. It's going to hurt every single American. I would argue it already does. But if this continues at the pace it's continuing, I mean, and we really have a media that is 90% beholden to one political party and just refuses to hold them accountable for anything. That's a really scary place to be in as a country. And then I have to wonder, do Americans see this? Do they see what's happening? Are they worried about what's happening? I don't know the answer to that. I do know that on Colbert Report last night, Caitlin Collins with CNN was one of his guests, and the audience gave me a little bit of hope that they are, in fact, seeing what's happening with old media.
Trump has kind of been thrown on his heels by this, and he's not really sure how to go after Vice President Harris. He knew his attack lines on President Biden. He really has struggled with how to go after someone who's 20 years younger than him, who is a different gender, a different race. It's kind of been this moment where he has not been able to coalesce around a single attack line.
I know you guys are objective over there, that you just report the news as it is. Oh, I know. CNN makes a... I know.
Was that supposed to be a laugh line?
I wasn't supposed to be, but I guess it is.
I guess it is. You gotta love that. Stephen Colbert's audience laughing, thinking he's telling a joke when he says that CNN is unbiased and shoots it straight. So yes, I think some Americans are waking up to this reality. Now, it depends on what you watch. I mean, if I have some family members who all they're watching is MSNBC. And that's the silo that they're watching, that they're getting their information and news from, and they might not know. They might genuinely not know that they're being spun a tale. I know people who only watch CNN, and if you only watch CNN, that you're probably led to believe that Donald Trump is this existential threat to our democracy, and Kamala Harris has all these great ideas like not taxing tipped workers. I don't know where we go from here. I mean, it has gotten horrible, worse than I ever expected that it would. And frankly, I don't know that this is the answer either. I don't know that this rise of independent media, which in a lot of ways is the wild, wild west, I don't know that it's the answer either. I worry about it all the time. When I quit my job in TV, and then we'll move on because I spent way more time on this than I intended. When I quit my job in TV, I really felt like I was at the peak of my career. Like everything was going great for me. You know, I had been talking to my agent about maybe going to one of the networks, trying to get a job at one of the networks, moving out of the state, moving to New York or DC. And, you know, I kind of saw all these things that disappointed me in the local media ecosystem and our coverage of things like the riots and the pandemic, et cetera. And then I started to realize, well, those things exist nationally as well. Like I'm going to be just as disappointed. And I talked to some friends who had worked at some of the networks and they're like, this is how it is here too. And so I came to the conclusion that I felt like old media needed to be broken down to the studs and built back up. And so I see that kind of as our role is, you know, showing that we can, you know, continuing to do the things that we think are important, like watchdog journalism, but also criticizing the media, pointing out what's happening with the media, and honestly, hopefully, through me and others who are doing what we're doing independently, demolishing the old media and giving rise to a new version of it that is more in keeping with what the First Amendment was all about, is more in keeping with what we need from the Fourth Estate. So I think there has to be a slingshot effect. I don't believe that the proliferation of independent outlets is the answer. I don't think it's sustainable. You know, we don't play, frankly, I'm just going to be honest, you know, independent media, you don't have rules. We have the rules that we choose to have. And we have our conscience and our commitment to making sure that, yes, we bring you opinions, but we're bringing you factual information. And if we ever get something wrong, we have, you know, a conscience and we want to correct that because our goal is always to give you factual information. But who's holding us accountable to that? I mean, I guess subscribers, right? If you feel like we're on here and we're just spitting falsehoods, then you'll cancel your subscriptions. And then that hurts us financially. We can't do the show, et cetera, et cetera. But when you have these independent reporters who they're sharing their stuff on social media, they don't technically work for anyone. There's no rules for them. There's no like belief that they have to behave a certain way. And I don't think that's really good either, because then you're relying on each independent journalist to sort of have their own standards that they're holding themselves to. So something has to change. I think independent media, what maybe will happen in the next 5 years, independent media, X as a platform for politicians to reach people directly, you know, this will become so big and it'll be so numerous, and old media will just fail because their ratings will suck and people will cancel their subscriptions. And then you have this sort of slingshot effect where the independent stuff is just too much, it's overwhelming, and so, you know, then you coalesce and you have a few like outlets that are reborn from that mess, that are trustworthy, that understand why old media failed. So I hope we're part of that. I think we are part of that, but it's just horrifying to me as someone who wanted to be a journalist since the age of 6, genuinely, or not 6, since the 6th grade, I wanted to be a journalist. And everything I did from 6th grade on was in pursuit of that end. And then I got my dream job and I was doing my dream job and I woke up one day and said, this is not what I wanted to do in the 6th grade. This is not what inspired me to do this job. So it's a really scary situation we're in as America. And people need to wake up to that fact and they need to wake up to it real quick.